Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Greg, the single guy, and Matt, the family guy. We're recording episodes from around the globe to tell you about the best kept secret in education. That's right, it's teaching overseas. We're glad to have you. Welcome to the episode. I have a special guest now who spent 3 years teaching in the States, starting in 2005. And after 3 years, he moved with his wife. He moved to Yemen and taught at a QSI school in Yemen for 3 years. Then he went back home for another 3 years, went back to his district, and sort of like it was on sabbatical, he went back and taught in the States again for 3 years. And then he went back and he went out into the Middle East to another school. And we're not going to focus as much on his Middle East school now, but we'll talk a little bit about it. I'm really interested in hearing about teaching in that country of Yemen. And my guest is Kent. I want to say your last name, just your first name, Kent?
Kent is fine.
Kent is fine. We'll stick with it. How are you doing today, Kent?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Greg.
All right, Kent. Welcome to the show, and I know you're doing some podcasting yourself, which is awesome. I'm glad you're here with us, and I really do want to focus on Yemen. But before we get into Yemen, let me shoot this off with a good question. How did you end up overseas at all? I mean, you were teaching in the States. What were you teaching in the States?
Okay, so I was teaching fifth grade in the States, and at that point, I had a friend who talked about teaching in Kuwait. And I said, wow, Kuwait, that's pretty amazing. I wonder what that was like. And then he said, well, he was in Kuwait during the time of the Iraqi invasion and the war in the region. As a matter of fact, his teaching career in Kuwait came to an end with the start of that war in the region. And he talked about all the complications and the difficulties of getting his money out and getting his family out and everything. And I looked at him and I said, after all of that, would you do it all over again? And he said, in a heartbeat, he said, I loved it more than anything, and I can't wait to go back one day.
Wow. So he was teaching in the States after leaving from when the Iraqi forces invaded, his school closed down and he moved back to the States and taught there.
That's right.
And he was teaching with you at your school?
No, he was teaching at a different school, but we were friends from a previous job.
Oh, that's fat. So you started looking into international teaching then?
That's right. I did. His advice to me was, as a new candidate for an international school, he said, go to the ISS job fair. And it just so happened it was going to be in Seattle the year I was looking. So I lived in Seattle. I taught in a little town just north of Seattle. And so I signed up getting ready to go to the fair because he sold me on how great international teaching could be. And I was looking really forward to my first international fair.
So you signed up for ISS and everything. And if I'm not mistaken, you were married at the time.
Yep.
And your wife is, what's her first name?
Her name is Carla.
Carla. And Carla was not a teacher.
She's not a teacher. She was, in her own words, along for the ride.
So I guess we could talk a whole nother episode about what the job fair was like for you. Did you end up going to the job fair?
Actually, I didn't make it to the job fair because I ended up getting an overseas teaching job even before the fair.
So was that through ISS that you had signed up for? Did you make the connections that way? Or I know because sometimes you sign up for the fair and you get all their database and you start making connections and interviewing. And is that how it worked for you?
Well, actually, I did do all those things. I made all the connections. I had reached out to schools. I had schools email me back saying, let's meet at the fair and let's talk. And it was going really great. But then I learned that Yemen had an international school in it. At the time, I was studying Arabic and I had a tutor, and my tutor was from Yemen, and he mentioned he thought there might be an international school in Yemen. And so I went home that night and I started searching all over the place to find that one international school in Yemen, and I found it. And I emailed them, and they emailed back and saying, you know what, we just had a job fair in your city yesterday. They said, but if you're willing to fly to Idaho, we'll meet with you.
They had their own job, like a different job fair in Seattle before ISS did?
Oh, that's right. They had their own, this is a QSI school, which is a system of schools, and they have 34 schools throughout the world now, I believe. And so they do their own big job fairs like the ISS and some of the other ones, but they also have their own little job fairs.
And that's QSI is Quality Schools International. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. And I should say this, that when you start researching international schools, you're going to hear a lot said about QSI. Some things that are flattering and some things not so. But I will say right off the bat that my experience with them for 3 years was very positive.
I've heard lots of great things. In fact, and I'll throw this in here real quick. I'm from Green Bay, Wisconsin, And I got on this little itty bitty plane once to go overseas back to whatever school I was teaching at whenever it happened. And there was a guy with a QSI shirt in front of me, and I had heard of QSI from the job fairs. Never interviewed with him, but I just reached out. He was like 2 seats in front of me on those little jets. And I said, "Oh my God, are you an international teacher?" And he said, "Yeah." And the two of us sort of hit it off just talking about him and his wife and his family and QSI schools. He was in Europe in one of their schools. Of course, 30 minutes later, we're in Chicago going off in our own directions. That's how I knew about, and I've met 1 or 2 from QSI. So that's really fascinating that they had their own job fair. I did not know that. But you did it without the job fair. So they hired you over the phone, or did you do a video at the time?
I flew to Idaho to meet their recruiter who was in Seattle the day before. Then he moved on to Idaho, and they said, "You know what, let's meet and talk." And so they flew me from Seattle to Idaho the next day, and we met, we talked, we spent a couple of hours together having sort of a one-on-one interview. And at the end of the day, they said, "We're really interested in hiring you." And that was the beginning. Of course, I accepted it, and that was the beginning of my international teaching career.
I tell you what, that's fascinating. I mean, the other thing is that, and this is one reason why I wanted to ask you, because I really have to beg forgiveness, but the first time I ever hear the word Yemen, living back in the States, and I've learned a lot more since then, but I mean, I'm back in the States at some point, and someone says, "I'm going to Yemen." I'm thinking about Yemen, rocket launchers on shoulders, and I mean, because the States, when you live there, there's so much bad news coming in from the Middle East. And Yemen is that little country south of, I think, Saudi Arabia, right?
That's right.
It's just on the southern tip of it, and they have an ocean line there, but it's a very small country, isn't it?
Well, it is small compared to its neighbor, Saudi Arabia, but really there are thousands of miles of pristine beach line. It's borders to the west, it's got the Red Sea, and to the south, it's got the Indian Ocean, and it is the most beautiful coastline. It's lovely.
You landed after talking to these guys, and you went and interviewed them in person, so you knew who was going to be, you knew something about the school, and you said, "Yeah, I'm going," and you packed up everything. Did you sell your house at the time?
Well, we didn't own a house, but we sold everything that we had. The only thing we really took was a couple of suitcases and a cat.
Oh my God. And you just decided, we're going to take the cat, we're going, the 3 of us are going on a flight. And do you remember back then what it was like to fly out, and was it forever? Or did you fly for 20 hours or what? I mean,
oh yeah, no, the flight was pretty good. We flew through Germany at that time. And so, from Seattle to Germany, and then Germany right into the capital of Yemen, which is Sana'a, which is the city that our school is located in.
Ah, man. All right. So you land in Yemen, and you've been teaching in the States for 3 years. Your wife doesn't teach either, and they hired you, and that's not easy to do with schools. A lot of times it's hard to get a job if you have a trailing spouse that doesn't teach, right? So you guys landed there. Tell me a little bit about Yemen then. I really don't know much about it.
Well, usually when you fly into the Middle East, you find yourself flying in the middle of the night when the weather is the coolest. And so you end up in this new country at a new job, and you can't even see it yet because it's still dark out there. And so usually what happens, you fly in at night, and someone from the school will meet you because there's paperwork, there's customs, there's things to go through, and you're tired, you've been flying all day. And so they'll meet you. They usually have a car waiting for you. Usually they have maybe other teachers there. And so it's a really great experience flying into a new school when the school is looking forward to you and ready for you. And we just had a great experience. It was the drive in from the airport to the school. I'm like a kid on a bus going on a field trip. It's just amazing looking out the window. And for all of you people who are international teachers, you'll know this experience of looking out the window in your new country. And it's amazing. And if you haven't done it, if you're still thinking about international teaching, it's one of the absolute highlights. And your first time is usually unforgettable.
Because I know I do have to throw it in there whenever we talk about international schools, and we're talking now about the Yemen school, is that not every school does that for you. I mean, there's different tiers, right? There's different levels of schools and how they take care of you on your onboarding process, what they call it. You can only hope, and it might be a good interview question too, is what's onboarding like? Are they going to send you a ticket? Are you going to be met at the airport? I remember one time we just got dropped in the airport, and we landed, and there's like no one there. Just find your way there. You know the name of the school, and that's it. I've heard lots of stories. For the most part, the top tier schools and the the middle tier schools, they do have an onboarding process where they meet you at the airport, help you with all of that custom stuff. And there's a lot going on before that, leading up to your arrival, right? You guys stayed there for 3 years, though. So some things really kept you there. Both you and Carla loved it?
I will say this, that from my point of view, I loved it. And it was great for me. For, the Middle East, public life, the public sphere is really skewed towards males, towards men in the Middle East. And I would say that my wife, Carla, she struggled a little bit with that because she is the type of person that wants to be out in the middle of the town, out doing things, out meeting people, out making friends. In some places in the Middle East, that can be a little bit more challenging. And I would say in Yemen, that might be true as well, because she wasn't as invited into the public spaces as a male like myself was. So we had slightly different experiences. We both love the weather. It's like San Diego weather all year long, because you know that Yemen is a desert, but the city, the capital, Sana'a, is 7,000, 8,000 feet up. And so it's in the mountains, and it's wonderful. It's beautiful. There are green trees, there's grass, there's hills. The city itself, Sana'a, is between two hills, kind of nestled in between there. So every day was like waking up in California.
Wow, I still can't, picture. I'm picturing just desert, like a wasteland, but it sounds beautiful. So you mentioned that it's mainly geared towards males. Is that because it's majority Muslim, or are there also Christians there?
Well, I would say that it's tricky in some parts of the Middle East. I don't think it's just because it's Muslim. I just think that that's the culture that's come up, that the public sphere is where the men spend a lot of their day, and the home and the private sphere is where the women spend a lot of their day. And so they're just carved out different niches. And I think for my wife, Carla, she tends towards the public space like I do.
Got it. Did she end up teaching there too?
She did. QSI brought her, our school, Sana'a International School, brought her in to work in the library part-time, then the librarian, and then they brought her in to teach kindergarten. So it really worked out nicely. We both worked full-time at the school for our last year. And I think that was a really positive experience for both of us.
How big is that school? When you were there, how big is it? I mean, it's big school, a small school?
I would say it's a small school. If I told you that we had, at the height of our school during my time there, we had 230, 240 students, K through 12, and even less than that some years.
Right. So that's like one class of each grade level, right?
Or that's right. One class, and some classes had 2 grade levels in them. I would say that expat population, who I say our school was about half expat population and about half of the Yemeni population and other places around Yemen. Our population had been going down. The expat population had been going down, and therefore our school was shrinking a little bit.
Got it. Okay. Tell me a story. I mean, just a random, anything you want about Yemen. I mean, people probably don't know a lot about Yemen, or living there or teaching there, or
I would say that for me, some of the highlights were locally, moving around through the city. We would walk on the weekends. We would walk from our house. They provide you with housing. And we would walk from our house down the streets, through the back alleys. Any new city you go to, get on your feet and just start walking around and just discover things from your feet, for your eyes. We would wind our way through the alleys, the embassies, and past the other schools, past some of the housing, and we would end up at the fish market. And we would go to the fish market where all the locals go to buy their fish and their seafood, and it comes in twice a day, usually once a day from the Red Sea and once a day from the Indian Ocean. And it's just the buzz of the city. And we would, I'll be honest with you, one of the pastimes in Yemen is that people love to bargain and they love to haggle. And I got to be honest with you, coming from Seattle, I wasn't really prepared for it. So I usually end up overpaying for things. And I think that a lot of international teachers have stories about going to the market. And some of us are more skilled than others, shopping and navigating the local bargaining. I was always really bad at it. So they'd see me coming and they would get ready for a pretty good payday. And I was all too happy to do it. Prices were great. And the food and the seafood, the shrimp, the tuna, the different fish that you would never see in the seafood market in the United States was all there, and it was delicious.
What was the most surprising thing? If you can think back, and I know there's a couple of years back because you've been out of Yemen for a while now. That was back 2005 to 8, right?
2008 to 2011.
Like I said, 2008 to 2011, you were there. So that's been a while back. That's over 10 years now. But can you think back of some of your surprises? Some of the surprises that you just didn't expect. Something happened and
Yeah, well, I would say there was a lot of surprises, but there were some small nice ones and some small not so nice ones. I remember one day, the power would go out for 3 or 4 hours every day as a way of sort of rationing the power in the capital. And one day we came home and the power had been out and our front lights of our house were out. And one of the Yemenis that live in the neighborhood met us at our door with candles. He had lit them both and handed them to us and opened the door and showed us the way in through the dark. And I would say that's my impression of the Yemeni people. Very friendly, very welcoming to you. When you get in the cab, they want you to sit in the front with them as equals, and they want to talk to you about where you're from in whatever language, whatever skill of language they've got, and they want to talk. That's my impression of them. And that's, some people might find that surprising. Once you live there, you get used to that, and it's very nice. Other times you might be surprised in a not so good way. I can remember sometimes we would be wanting to drive to work in the morning, and there would be a new checkpoint set up, maybe some young soldiers trying to make their mark on the world, and they wouldn't let you through. And you're like, well, I got to go to work. And so you would have to negotiate your way through the checkpoint. You would have to negotiate your way to get home from work or to work. So sometimes lots of little things for the better or for the worse.
Did you ever have to bribe any of them? Because I've had to do that in some countries I've lived in. Like, here come the police. They want lunch, right? Because they're not getting paid very much. You don't have to answer that. I mean, I just remember those are some surprises for me around the world in different experiences.
One thing I loved about Yemen is that we had teachers. We were some of the new teachers. A couple of us came in that year, but there was a core of teachers who had been around for a long time, and they would really teach you the ropes. They kept their eye on you. They helped teach you what it was like, not just to be a teacher, but how to be a teacher in Yemen.
Like when you come in, there's all the new teachers sort of come in at the same time, depending on the size of the school. And we generally call it a cohort, right?
That's right.
The people that come in that year with you and stay with you throughout the years that you're teaching there, some might have, those that move on or stay with you, you're known as your cohort. And that's very normal. It's sort of like being in the freshman class, right? College, right?
That's right.
I interrupted you. I wanted you to continue with your thought.
I was just going to end with a thought that said that the more experienced teachers would say, try not to just hand out things to people in bribes, because what is a cheap bribe today will be an expensive bribe tomorrow. And in my experience in Yemen, usually a smile and a friendly conversation would get you the best results. I think with anyone in the world, the Yemenis are the same, that they want someone to be friendly and respectful and be interested in them as people.
So if I moved there, do I need to learn Arabic? You said that you were taking Arabic at the time. Was that just a happenstance? Do you have to know Arabic to live there? I know you don't have to learn it to teach there, because the American schools, the international schools, the lingua franca is English. I know that it helps you live there. In any country, it sort of helps you know the language because you can get deeper into the local culture. That's my experience, and I'm sure it's with you. But did you have to learn Arabic?
Oh, by no means. I don't believe you had to learn Arabic. I think that there's a couple different levels. There's the level where some people go into a city like Yemen or a country like Yemen and a city like Sana'a, and they don't know any of the language. And I think that's probably not the approach that you want to take. You probably want to get some of the local terms down to just basic interactions with people.
Give me some local terms.
Oh, well, tamam. We would use tamam for everything from okay, great, excellent, no thank you. It's one of those words that just means a little bit of everything, and you say it and everyone seems to understand what you mean and life will go forward. Tamam was the big one. And so I would say that the people that learned some of the local flavor of the Arabic language, they could get along great, and they could get respect back from people by using the limited Arabic. There would be other people that, because they were there for a long time, that they would speak the language at a pretty decent level, and they would have friends that were Yemeni friends, and they would converse in Arabic. They would do some business in Arabic. So I think there's different levels. I think you want to try to avoid being the lowest level where you don't know any of the language, but I don't think you have to study for hours and hours and hours every day to get along, because you can get along even without studying the language there or knowing it. People got along great, but I think if for best practice, learn some of the language.
So where would you go travel? I'm going to change the subject a little bit. Where would you go traveling when you were in Yemen?
Yep.
What were your vacation spots or your travel spots?
Okay, well, I can think of 3 places that we went to while we were there that made for great travel. That would be the perfect vacation for anyone, no matter what country, but in particular in Yemen. I can think of 4. Let me go through them real fast. So going down to Sana'a, we would go west through Hodeidah to the Red Sea coast. we would go visit Cameron Island, which the secret of Cameron Island is it's the healthiest coral reef in the world. It is lively, it is growing, it is not shrinking, it's not bigger than the coral reefs of Australia and other regions of the world, but it is healthy and it's growing and it's beautiful. Cameron Island for scuba diving, lovely. Some other places we would drive south to Aden. Aden was the place that was occupied by various world powers, and particularly Russia for a while, or the Soviet Union at the time, and beautiful beaches right on the Indian Ocean, the Gulf of Aden, as they would call it. Lovely vacation spot, lovely place to travel. We went down there a few times. Different characteristic. Aden and Sana'a are very different in character. You could do a whole episode on that. Another trip that we made, we drove down through the south and then west. We didn't do a lot of the east. We didn't get to a lot of the east because there might have been different restrictions of travel. But to the west, we went through Mocha and some of the famous city where we get the name for Mocha coffee. We drove through these little cities and towns and just little areas, and just the most beautiful thing. But the number one experience I would have to say is traveling actually off the mainland of Yemen. I know this sounds silly, off the mainland into the island of Socotra. The island of Socotra is at the mouth of the Red Sea. It's closer to Africa than it is to the Middle East, but it's owned and controlled by Yemen, and it is the most beautiful island. It's way out there, and 75% of the flora and fauna are unique to that island. And to be able to go and spend a week or two there was the chance of a lifetime. And I hope in the future more and more people will be able to visit and spend time at this beautiful island.
You got me sold. Oh, what should we talk about next? Anything off the top of your head you want to share?
I will say this, that Yemen is not a place that I would necessarily rush to get to right now. And even in our last year in 2011, there would be soldiers from the government lined up on the streets. There would be protesters and other people lined up on the other side of the street. And I will say this, that there was a lot of different factions and forces in Yemen that were sort of, at odds and ends with each other. But I will say that everyone was so friendly and so respectful to us as Americans and as teachers. People would smile and wave to you and you'd smile and wave back. And then they would turn back at each other and glare at each other. But everyone was very friendly to us and made us feel really like that's a country I want to go back to. And right now it's not really possible to be in that country. But I think keep your eyes open because sometime in the future, that country will open up again and it's going to be the place that you want to visit again in the future.
So if I was looking at schools, I might even go overseas and recruit with QSI and get into their QSI family. And then once Yemen opens up again, maybe their school would be an offering for me to do that through QSI. Do they do that kind of a thing where you post for different countries after a while?
I should have mentioned this before. Absolutely. QSI, again, you're going to research international jobs and you're going to hear lots of opinions about QSI and the organization. They were so nice to me and I had such a good experience in Yemen. I recommend them. And they're also willing to take a chance on a younger teacher, a newer teacher, a teacher that has maybe a non-teaching spouse, and a couple of children along for the ride. They're family oriented and they're willing to take a chance on you. And I think I'm grateful for that. And I think many teachers get into the QSI system. They learn something about the trade of international teaching. Sometimes they stay with QSI. Sometimes they go up to the States and sometimes they move on to other international schools. They're a great organization and I would put them on my list. If I'm a new international teacher and I'm looking to go overseas, I would not keep them off my list. I would put them on my list. I would meet with them because they open up a lot of doors for our teachers.
Do you know what I noticed about QSI is that they have a lot of schools in smaller countries that may not be on anybody's radar. When you talk to those of us that are, like you and I are both seasoned teachers overseas, and we always agree on one thing, and that's that there are small countries that nobody ever thinks about going to that are off your radar. It's that gem of an experience that you would have never dreamed of. You could not foresee having such a great experience. My example would have been Cambodia. I never thought I'd end up in little Cambodia, but I can tell you stories forever about living there, teaching there, enjoying it, getting to know the local culture. And those are the little countries that people just, you hear stories, but you'd never dream of going there. It's not a European vacation. It's much different. There's differences in the governments at different times and the stability. So, of course, you want to be safe. But on the other hand, you don't always want to listen to what other people say about these countries. And QSI has a lot of smaller schools that they do bring in some teachers without a lot of experience to give them the chance to do it and get into the field. And then they broaden their horizons by giving them other options of schools in those other countries. I love it that you went to QSI. I love the fact that you're sharing with us about Yemen. It's not just about, the negative stuff like I heard back in the past. I do want to go there at some point, but it's not on my list of vacation spots, as you say right now in 2021. Any last words you want to say there, Kent, about Yemen and your experiences? Because this has been great.
No, I really appreciate this opportunity. And for all the people that are teaching overseas or want to teach overseas, take a chance. Do it. Take the leap and go. We just left Seattle after spending our whole lives there, and we took the leap, and we never looked back. We've enjoyed it, and we've enjoyed every day since then. And so,
All right, listeners, this has been the episode with Kent, who went from the United States after several years and then taught in Yemen and shared that with us during our interview today. Thank you very much, Kent. This is Greg, the single guy, signing off.
And expat Kent, the cat guy.
Nice job. Matt is not here, so Kent was wanting to sit in and say that the whole interview. We'll see you next time.
See ya. Thank you.